Bartolo Marsicano had kept the cellars at Casa Salunto for 51 years, and he had never expected to witness a marriage signed at the godmother's writing table on a rainy afternoon in October, the bride and the groom each holding their own copy of a contract that neither of them had to sign. He stood at the doorway with his cap in his hands. He watched Donna Cesara, 83 years old and small as a sparrow in her good black dress, read the terms aloud one last time in the careful, unhurried voice she had used to read storybooks to a boy named Renato 40 years ago. He watched the boy, now Don Renato Marenco of the Marenco vineyards, 42 and tall and still as a column of oak, listen to every word as if he had never heard it. He watched the young woman across the table, Lena Carreras, 26, the daughter of the cellar master who had died 2 winters past, her hands ink-stained from the ledger she had been keeping that morning, listen with the same grave attention. The pen lay between them. Neither of them reached for it first. "You may say no, child," Donna Cesara said, the way she had said it 3 times already that week. "You may say no, and the cottages are still yours by my own hand, my own will, separate and clear. The clause does not bind you. It only blocks the bequest as my friend Tommaso wrote it. So we work around the clause or we let the clause win. The choice is yours." "I have read it, Madrina," Lena said. Her voice was low and steady. "I read it on Monday. I read it again last night. I'm not signing because I must. I am signing because Tommaso Carreras was my father and he meant the cottages for me, and the only way to honor the will as he wrote it is to take it as he wrote it. 1 year, separate rooms, either of us may end it at any time. The cottages and the stipend remain mine regardless. I have read the clause and I have agreed to it freely. Don Renato may say no." The Don did not say no. He looked at Donna Cesara for a long moment, a look Bartolo had seen on his face only twice in his life, the look of a boy who had once been carried in this same parlor by this same small woman when the fever had nearly taken him at the age of 9. Then he looked at Lena. He inclined his head, gravely, the way a man inclines his head to a person he has resolved to treat with the courtesy of a stranger and the honor of a sister. "I will sign," he said, "on Miss Carreras's terms. Either of us may end it at any time, separate quarters, separate lives, the cottages remain hers." He lifted the pen. He signed his name in the steady, careful hand of a man who had signed harder papers in worse rooms, and he set the pen down precisely halfway between his copy and hers. Lena lifted the pen next. She signed her name beneath his. She set the pen down. She did not look at him. She looked at Donna Cesara, and Donna Cesara reached across the writing table and took both her hands at once, and held them for a moment without speaking, the way an old woman holds the hands of a young one when there are no more words to say. The rain had not stopped. Bartolo opened the door for the Don, and the Don put on his coat in silence, and they walked out across the gravel to the long black car under the porte-cochere. The Don paused at the car. He looked back at the lighted parlor window, where the small woman and the young woman were still seated at the table. "Bartolo," he said, "Don Renato, you will look after her, as if she were my own Don Renato, as I have these 2 years. Thank you." He got in the car. The car went down the cypress alley toward the gate, and the gate opened for it, and the car turned onto the road toward the city, and that was how Bartolo Marsicano stood witness to the quietest marriage Casa Salunto had ever made. The first month was simple enough. The Don did not come back. Lena did her work. She rose at 5 and lit the cottages at dusk, the row of 9 little stone houses along the lane the workers called La Querce because of the oaks, and she checked the casks in the cellars, and she sat in the office of an evening with the leather-bound ledger Bartolo had taught her father to keep. Donna Cesara took her tea in the parlor at 4. The household ran as it always had. Twice a man named Signor Pavetti came up the drive in a polished gray car, a neighbor who owned the next valley over and had been trying for 2 years to buy La Querce for nothing. And twice Lena met him at the gate in her denim apron with her ledger under her arm, and told him courteously that the row was not for sale. And twice Signor Pavetti drove away pale around the mouth, because word had carried by then that the cellar master's daughter was married to Don Renato Marenco. And Signor Pavetti was a man who feared the Marenco name the way men of his sort always do. The Don came back in November. He came on Marenco business, a question of the tenant contracts on the lower fields, and he stayed 2 nights and he slept in the east wing, 3 corridors and a stairwell from Lena's room above the cellar office. He took his supper with Donna Cesara in the small dining room, and Lena was invited because Donna Cesara was unbending on the point. Lena came in her plain gray dress with her hair tied back, and she sat across from him, and she answered his questions about the casks and the years pressing in the careful, unhurried voice of a person who knew her work cold. The Don listened. He asked one question, she answered. He asked another. Bartolo, serving the wine, watched the Don's eyes follow her hands when she explained how a particular cask had soured, and how she had saved the rest by drawing it off at the proper hour. He had not seen the Don's eyes follow anything in a long while. The Don came back in December. He came in January. By February he was on the estate 3 days of every fortnight, and the household had stopped asking why. He sat at the godmother's bedside on the mornings she felt poorly. He walked the cellars with Lena and asked her about the pressing schedule and about the contracts she had renegotiated with the bottlers. And once, when a sudden thaw flooded the lower cask room and 400 liters of last year's red threatened to be lost, he stood in his shirt-sleeves beside Bartolo and Lena and a half-dozen estate hands for 6 hours, lifting and racking and bucketing. And when the last cask was safe, he sat down on an overturned crate in his ruined trousers and watched Lena seal the final bung with the small wooden mallet her father had used, and he did not move for a long minute. Bartolo, leaning against the cellar wall, with his back aching the honest ache of a man past 70 who had worked beside 2 good people, thought he had never seen the Don look that way at anyone. Lena handled the second visit from Signor Pavetti in March. The man had grown bolder. He had come up to the door of the cottage office itself, hat in hand, with a folder of papers and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He had heard, he said, that the arrangement at La Course might be reconsidered. He had heard, he said, that there had been talk. Lena listened with her hands folded over the ledger. She let him finish. Then she said very quietly, "Signor, you have wasted your morning. The row is not for sale. It has never been for sale. It will not be for sale next year either. Please do not come up the drive again unless you are bringing a wedding gift. And please understand that if I see your car at our gate one more time, I will have Bartolo send word to my husband, and my husband will send word to whoever he sends word to, and the matter will pass out of my hands and into rooms you would prefer to know nothing about. Good morning." Signor Pavetti went down the drive without a word. He did not come back. Bartolo, who had been standing on the steps polishing a glass and listening, felt his heart go very warm in his chest, because Lena Carras had said "my husband" without flinching, and she had said it without claiming any of the things a young woman in her position might have claimed, and she had said it because Don Renato had given his word a year before in a parlor on a rainy afternoon, and his word, even on a paper that meant nothing, was the only shield she was prepared to use. In April she came down with a fever for 3 days. Donna Cesara, who was 83 and frail as paper, sat by Lena's bed all 3 afternoons and read aloud from a slim volume of poems. The late Tommaso Carras had bound himself in the cellar press when his daughter turned 12. The Don came up that Thursday from the city without warning, with a bag of oranges from a market 3 hours away, because Donna Cesara had once mentioned that her father had always brought her oranges when she was ill, and he set the bag on the kitchen table and he stood in the doorway of Lena's room for the count of 10 seconds, not crossing the threshold because the threshold was hers, and he said very low, "Get well, please," and he turned away. He sat with his godmother in the parlor for the afternoon. He did not come up again. The next morning the kitchen had been quietly stocked with broth, with bread, with 2 small jars of honey from the abbey on the hill, and the Don's car was gone before Lena was well enough to come down the stairs. In May, Donna Cesara took to her bed and did not come down again. She went the way the very old sometimes go, peacefully, quietly, blessed, no fight in her. Over the course of 3 soft afternoons in early June, the windows opened to the cypresses, Lena on one side of the bed and the Don on the other, and Bartolo standing at the foot with his cap in his hands. The old woman spoke very little at the end. She held both their hands at once, the way she had held Lena's that day in the parlor, and she said, in the careful, unhurried voice she had used all her life, "You will keep each other honest," and she closed her eyes and she did not open them again. At the small wake there was no funeral. Donna Cesara had hated funerals. There was a long table on the lawn, and the workers came up from the cottages, and the cook set out bread and cold lamb and the good wine. Lena stood and spoke for 2 minutes. She did not weep. She thanked the gathered house for the care they had shown her godmother. She said 1 or 2 simple things about who Donna Cesara had been, and then she said a thing that Don had not been ready for. She said, "She used to tell me when I was a girl in this house that a person becomes who they are by being patient with the small days. She said it to me 3 weeks ago in this same parlor. She said it to my mother once. I think she said it to many of you." She paused. She always said it the same way. She always added at the end, very softly, "And when the small days are over, you will know it. Tonight the small days are over. I think we know it." The Don set his glass down on the linen. He sat very still. Bartolo, who had heard Donna Cesara say that line to the boy Renato 51 separate times across 40 years, saw the Don's face go through a small unguarded change he had never seen on it before. The Don bowed his head. He kept it bowed for the count of 20. When he raised it, his eyes were wet, and he did not try to hide that they were wet, and Lena saw it from the other end of the table and did not look away. That night the cottages were lit one by one along the lane. It was Lena's habit since her father's death to walk Le Querce at dusk and turn on the small porch lamp at each door 9 lamps, the length of the row, the same 9 her father had wired by hand the year she was born. The Don walked it with her. They walked from the first cottage to the last in silence, the lamps coming up behind them in the long blue twilight, and at the 9th cottage the Don stopped, and he put his hand on the closed door of the empty house at the end of the row, the way a man puts his hand on a thing he is committing to memory, and he said, "Lena." She turned. He had not used her given name once in 11 months. "It is June 14th tomorrow," he said. "The papers end. I have brought them. I will tear them up if you ask me to. I will tear them up if you do not ask me to. I would like, if it is something you would wish, to ask you again. Not for the cottages, not for the bequest, not because we signed anything in October. I would like to ask you on your terms whether you would have me, and only if you would have me as a man and not as a paper. You may say no, you may take the night, you may take the year. The cottages are yours regardless, and they will be yours regardless until the day you choose otherwise. Will you think on it?" Lena looked at him for a long moment in the blue light at the end of the row of cottages. She did not weep. She reached out and laid her hand on the closed door beside his, near but not touching, and she said, in the same low, steady voice she had used to read the contract aloud in the parlor a year before, "I have thought on it. I thought on it in October when I signed. I thought on it in November when you watched me seal the cask. I thought on it the night you stood in the doorway of my room with the oranges and did not cross. I thought on it this afternoon while she was speaking through me at the table. I have my answer, Renato, yes." He did not move at first. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and brought out the papers, the 2 copies folded together, his and hers, the seal of the family lawyer still bright on the corner. He held them out to her. She took them. She tore them across once, and across again, and a third time, and she let the pieces fall onto the gravel between the cottages, and the wind off the cypresses lifted one of them and carried it a little way down the lane, and that was the end of the contract that had brought them to each other, and the beginning of the marriage they would make from then on freely, without paper, on their own honest terms. Bartolo, watching from the open kitchen door at the head of the lane, with the 9th cottage lamp small and warm at the far end, and the 2 of them standing together at the closed door of the empty house, set his cap on the table beside the bread. He was past 70. He had served the late Tommaso Carrers, and he had served Donna Cesara, and he had watched a boy named Renato grow into a man called Don, and he had watched the cellar master's quiet daughter grow into a woman who could meet that man with her hand on a closed door and her own word freely given. He had stood at a writing table on a rainy afternoon in October and watched 2 people sign a paper that bound neither of them. He had stood at the end of a row of cottages on an evening in June and watched the same 2 people tear that paper up. He had been a witness all his life to small days, and tonight, the way Donna Cesara had taught a girl who taught it back to a man, he knew, without needing to be told, that the small days were over.